Speak maybe a little bit to this idea of the emotional scientist.
Yeah, so this comes from the work of Mark Brackett, and he's written the book Permission to Feel. He is the director of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale. And so the contrast would be the emotion judge, where we're judging our emotions. And oftentimes this even looks like we feel feelings about our feelings. I feel angry that I'm sad. I feel upset with myself that I'm feeling guilty. I feel disappointed that I felt embarrassed or awkward. And so the emotional scientist is practicing more of that curiosity than judgment. It's one of these things you realize, especially in the moment, man, is it hard to do. And I think one way you can practice it is to really try to untangle the emotions from the interpretation. Most times when we're upset with someone, we would say, oh, I feel that they don't understand, or I feel that they are an idiot. I feel like they just won't get it. While you're using the word feeling, you're not actually describing any feelings. You're just expressing belief. And so you can work that back and you go, all right, when I say I feel that they won't understand or they won't get it, we can ask the question, when you believe that, what is it that you feel? And then can I work that back to actually ask myself, what does that actually say about me? And what is going on inside of me? Or what meaning am I putting onto this? And how do those feelings actually point me in a direction to better understand what else is going on for me?
Welcome to the Spear and Clover podcast, the show where military mindset meets the spirit of the puppy. I'm your host, Jason Skisick, the entrepreneurial evangelist, and each week I bring you the stories of visionaries who see the world as it could be and can't help but take action. Guys, successful people in any realm of life seem to share a common trait, the ability to look into the future. This helps them to plan and behave today in a way that'll get them to their desired results tomorrow. This is something that most people in most walks of life understand. But the most successful people don't seem to stop there. Beyond looking forward, these folks become masters at looking backwards and, in fact, inwards to discover new and meaningful ways to improve and thrive. Today's guest has built a business around helping these folks do a better job of this. He empowers leaders with deeper and more powerful emotional intelligence, which allows them to succeed in ways that would otherwise be impossible. If you want to learn how to better solve problems, build bulletproof and cohesive teams, and master that beast between your ears, then this conversation is for you. Please welcome my friend, Jared Cohen. Jared, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Jason. I am super excited to be here with you. I love the podcast forum and I'm pumped.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we met through our mutual friend, Kenny Kane, who's if you're friends with Kenny Kane, you're friends with me. And so shout out to Kenny Kane. Tell me a little bit about how you guys have worked together and what sort of it is that you're doing now with your business you're running now.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So I, like yourself, like Kenny, have a background in fitness and CrossFit. I got involved and aware of the CrossFit world back in 2010 and became a coach shortly thereafter and was coaching pretty much full time between 2012 and 2019. And I found out about what he had going on, what he was tinkering with in 2015. My journey in CrossFit was more in the realm of mobility, big fan and student of Kelly Starrett and Jill Miller. And alongside that, have always been someone that is more interested in the psychological aspects of learning, really. And that's what always drew me to CrossFit, was like, I just thought it was this amazing laboratory for people to learn skills. And I graduated my undergrad with a degree in psychology, never thought I was going to go back to school. But as I was teaching in the gym and being responsible for fundamentals, so anybody that was new to CrossFit was going through me. I was working with them really to get them ready for class. And I just continued to be fascinated by what people thought they could or couldn't do. And this is really my own story as well, is that CrossFit was the first time I really was able to prove to myself, wow, I have all of these latent abilities that I never thought, and no one really ever told me or suggested that I had. Growing up, I have I have a younger brother, and growing up, he was the athlete in the house. My parents put him into gymnastics because he showed potential and promise, and I didn't really get that opportunity. So I always believed like he can walk on his hands, I can't. And CrossFit changed everything for me in that. And as I was coaching people, I became more passionate about how can I help them also go through a similar transformational journey about what's possible. So I ended up going back to school for a master's in sport and performance psychology and a master's in organizational psych. And it was during that time that I found out about what Kenny was doing with context coaching. Mm-hmm. And we hear a lot about, I think most fitness professionals will talk about the mental aspect, but it's rare that somebody will actually have a strategic or concrete way that they're actually training that alongside the physical, as opposed to just saying and acknowledging, yes, that hard physical training is going to ask a lot of your mental fortitude. Mm-hmm. And I was really drawn to the fact that Kenny had thought about, what if we framed workouts with different contexts? What if we really gave people and we guided them to approach their workouts? It could be the same workout, but with a different intention, whether that's practice or competition or mental toughness. And really from that point on, Kenny and I, we struck up a friendship, a intellectual kinship. And then in 2017, I moved out to Santa Monica to essentially do sports psychology consulting at CrossFit LA, which has become Oak Park. And ever since then, we have continued to tinker with a variety of models and practices, mainly to equip coaches to learn how they can become more adaptable in their coaching process and offering, and then how to equip a team of coaches to really reinforce this greater diversity of skills that is meant to enhance people's psychological well-being.
Wow, that's fascinating. So why is it that you think so many people come from fitness, in my experience, particularly CrossFit, and find other career paths that ascend above, or not above, but aside from that or outside of that? It's so common. Like, you don't run into very many teachers who become business coaches or performance coaches or psych, but I do meet a lot of people from fitness. I'd love to hear your take. I've asked this question a bunch of times and I have my own opinion on it, but I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it too. I really think a lot of it is a testament to CrossFit and that original methodology from Greg Glassman, this like multidisciplinary consideration, this multidisciplinary pursuit, discipline, like the discipline to be like cross training, and not just cross training in that we're going to do this and then we're going to do that and then we're going to do that, but we are going to learn from all the different things that these different mediums of physical expression allow for. And I just think there's something about that then attracts a real diverse group of people. And then you can't help but go, oh, I want to go check out what that person's doing. And I want to check out what that person's doing. And then once you get to that person, you realize they have a whole nother reference list. And it just becomes this like exponential thing really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I see that. You talk about Glassman. So Greg Glassman talks about everything is everything, sort of virtuosity in all things. And the methodology starts physical, and then it's mobility, and then it's nutrition, and then it's hydration, and then it's sleep. And pretty soon it's like work and relationships and all these other things. So I can definitely see where that would happen. Also, you see this reflected in jiu-jitsu as well. I do both disciplines, and there's just no better metaphor for life or how to live well than walking into any jiu-jitsu gym and just talking to a black belt. It's the hit rate on wisdom. If you just talk to a black belt in jiu-jitsu is incredibly high, in the high 90% that you're going to get somebody who's wise and balanced and probably nice for the most part. But that being said, it's like, I love the way you're putting that. And to me, it just seems like the same methodologies that we test, train, and retest in fitness, we can test, retrain, and test in knowledge or business systems or relationships. And I just think that you're such a good example of that in practice. In particular, one thing I noticed about just going over some of your reading, some of the stuff that you've written lately, is rereading. This is something that's near and dear to me, but I'd love to hear it. You wrote something about rereading the books and the subject stuff that have made an impact on you. Can you speak about why that is and what you mean by that?
Yeah, thanks. So I wrote this article called Stop Reading, Start Rereading. And this is something I've been fascinated with for a while, both like why I do it, but also like why I think there is something like really powerful, spiritual, and like a secret weapon in it. And for me, I'll just start with one of my core values is depth. I have an insatiable drive to like deeply understand whatever it is I'm passionate about and have a lot of eagerness toward. Even growing up as a big music fan, like I was just obsessed always with understanding like where does that song come from in terms of I'm a big blues and classic rock fan. And so in blues music, it's a lot of people covering the same song. And so there's a curiosity I have to go, but where did who originally wrote that song, right? And what are all those versions? But as far as rereading, I think the other interesting thing is when we read something once, it's just information. And oftentimes that information will strike some chord that we notice. And you can notice it because if you're reading something physical, you underline it or you star it, you circle it, you highlight it. If you're reading something on your digital device, maybe you take a screenshot or you save it. Maybe even you're compelled to share it with someone. I know for myself, if I'm listening on audio, I might even just rewind it 15 seconds, rewind it again. And so I think part of it is also like becoming really aware of your own intuition and the things that grab your attention and not even judging that or overthinking that, but just really following that train of influence. And then realizing that if it hits you meaningfully once, what would be the value of revisiting that often, especially revisiting it at different times throughout your life when you're changing, your circumstances are changing, or even revisiting it at different times when now you have a new application for it. I heard this great phrase from Tiago Forte. He's wrote the book Building a Second Brain, and he says we shouldn't call it note taking, we should call it note giving, because we're giving a note to our future selves.
I love
right? And this is what you talked about at the beginning, right? Like a visionary and having some sense of who is my future self and what does my future self need. And I really believe like rereading is the ultimate way to equip your future self with what it will need and what it can benefit with from when it finds itself in these different situations or opportunities for greater influence and impact.
Yeah, so I didn't mention this yet, but I just started only rereading things in 2020, I think.
Wow.
I only was rereading things, and I've been preaching it. And in fact, I have a challenge where the only thing you're allowed to do is reread books. And so it's just such a, I don't even mean to brag. I just want to tell you that how closely we are aligned on that. And I have been rereading still and then reading some new stuff now, but I went through a period where I was only rereading, and what I found was no man walks through the same river twice, right? And so you're a different person, and you access the locked book with only the depth of key that you have when you have it. And the next time you come back, what I find is just like anything else. If I met my wife one time and then didn't see her for 5 years and was like, should I marry her? We should probably spend a lot of time together to get used to these ideas and let them warm up and acclimate and evolve. And so I just personally very deeply resonate with that idea and advocate for it if you're listening at home. The thing I would point out too, and I was curious your take on this, I've done this with fiction for fun. I've done it with fiction that's a little headier, like 1984 or Atlas Shrugged. I've done it with nonfiction, like business books. Do you have a preference? And are there any particular titles that you find yourself going back to? Or
yeah, for sure. So I definitely have a preference for rereading nonfiction. I do and have reread fiction. As for a fiction book, I recently reread is Shantaram. Which if you haven't read is just a wild, epic, incredible story, like a modern day Odyssey about the author. It's based on his life where he was a fugitive, heroin addicted bank robber, escaped jail, fled to India, is in India, ends up living in the slums and becoming the sort of doctor for the slums in India, and then joining a particular gang or mob in India. So it's like the greatest fusion of action and romance and philosophy. I think for that, when there are these epic journeys or particularly prose or fiction that also just has these lines they're like music. So you'd listen to your favorite songs over and over. think there's something really special to reread fiction. For me, though, I prefer the rereading nonfiction because I really believe like there are so many people writing books that really speak to these distinctions or like alternative ways of thinking and viewing the world that like we just are just so far from our default. And it's a fish being put back in the water. Like we're so quick to just be indoctrinated back into our defaults and our habits. And so I find certain books where I'm like almost obsessively trying to retrain my brain. Like I want to hear something so many times that now my mental blueprint has literally been upgraded to the extent that now I can see the world through that prism. My wife is 19 weeks pregnant.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. And aside from leadership and almost becoming a father, like I've always been fascinated with parenting. And so we've been reading this book by Becky Kennedy called Good Inside, Becoming the Parent You Want to Be. And that's another one where you just realize, man, like that you hear it and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you also realize nobody does this. Like it's just not part of what we've been conditioned to. And so just the desire to go like, how can I hear this enough times? And we're both friends with and familiar with Mark England and Procabulary's work, right? It's the same idea. It's like, how do I start training that reticular activating system to go, oh, wait a minute, that's a negation. and so it's the same idea for me there. I do a lot of like public speaking and work with the managers and supervisors within the Los Angeles Department of Health Services. And for me, that's always an opportunity where I want to share a lot of these, like this great wisdom that I'm reading. And instead of being up there with the book, I want to have it committed to memory. Almost a musician would, in the middle of a solo, go, oh, let me do this little thing I learned from someone else. And just so for me, it's like having access to these different ideas and then ultimately in the moment, like finding connection to go like, oh, I think this is really valuable to add here. Just add another one I've been rereading a lot is Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. And she has a quote in there. Most people would prefer living disappointed than risking feeling disappointed. And that to me, it captures so much. And it really captures, I think, the essence of why we tend to not go outside our comfort zone or tend to really cling to these beliefs about how many things won't work or that's just the way it is, because it's safer to live with that disappointment than to risk the feeling of it as we embark on a potential unknown.
Yeah, that's super interesting because I think of that. It's similar to training in martial arts or even fitness. Is if I run myself through a crucible daily, then when there's a small fire in front of me, it doesn't scare me or I don't freeze up or whatever it may be. And so through this conversation, we've uncovered, even not deeply, but that you have a physical practice of we're going to go through whatever you call it, like hygiene. It's you don't bathe once ever, right? You have to bathe all the time in order to stay clean. And so what I've heard from you is we have this physical practice, we have a mobility practice. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you have a nutrition practice and a sleep practice. And now we just covered sort of your mental or philosophical practice. Talk to me about emotions. Talk to me about, I just like seeing that theme throughout. It's even as we're talking, like I can see 3 dimensions of how somebody goes from being a CrossFit person to a leadership person or or even like a relationship person or whatever it may be. Talk to me about your emotional practice and how you view that.
Yeah, thanks. And you're right. It's interesting because I really think I do attribute so much to I think Kelly Starrett and just that philosophy of what is the daily maintenance, right? And what is our relationship to like due diligence?
I have to do this though. Just shout out to K-Star. He's the book that's behind me.
There you
mostly
go.
Because it's a big, thick, nice looking book, but just
so here's like a funny aside is that before that book was published, so that book was published in, I think, the spring of 2013. So the summer before that was 2012 at the CrossFit Games. I entered in the raffle for winning something for that book, and I was picked. So I was the original Becoming a Supple Leopard raffle winner. Wow. Juliet and Kelly flew me out to San Francisco, put me up in a hotel.
Wow.
I got to hang out with Kelly and go out to dinner with him and Diane Fu, and
Yeah, she's great.
fond memories of just that journey. Yeah,
That's so special, man. And
yeah.
I didn't mean to derail you,
It's
but back
okay.
to your thought on the
You got
emotional
it.
practice. I held our place.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry to the listener. We're all over the place.
Yeah, I think emotions is just this. It's an incredible, infinitely fascinating topic, and I think science now, neuroscience, psychology, we're learning so much about how we have traditionally gotten emotions wrong, both in terms of what they are and also their value.
Hmm.
And I think for me, the emotional practice is really treating emotions as data. It's just another piece of data, similar to how we might look at a certain thought or an idea we have, or any kind of like evidence-based thing, and go, what does this tell me? What can I learn about this? What is this informing me? What is this pointing me to? As opposed to, I think many of us have been conditioned on one end to think there's good emotions and there's bad emotions, and the bad ones I should just try and like repress or suck up or ignore or not reveal.
Mhm.
And then the good ones, it's everybody like socially rewards them. And so for me, the emotional intelligence practice is, one, how do I become more emotionally literate? And so with that is like quite literally increasing my vocabulary to express what I'm feeling. And part of that is to be curious, is to go, am I stressed? Am I anxious?
Hmm.
Am I irritated? Am I frustrated? Am I overwhelmed?
Mm-hmm.
Am I just disappointed? Am I just tired? Am I hungry? Am I confused? And so you start realizing, oh, there's so much nuance. And there's actually a lot more potential granularity of difference than how we tend to just refer to our experiences as good, bad, fine,
Mm-hmm.
stressed. So that's really the big thing. And I would recommend for people, the first thing is, what is that emotional literacy that you can start engaging with as you begin practicing really recognizing and tuning in and going, what am I experiencing in this moment? How might I label it? Why am I labeling it that way? And then ultimately, like, where might there be an opportunity to express that in relationship, which is, as we know and might imagine, much harder than we might presume.
Hmm. Yeah, I was in my mid-30s before I could really observe myself having feelings. And you talk about this concept of an emotional scientist, which I love. I love that phrase, an emotional scientist, because to some extent, if we look at what's happening in front of us, maybe not as an experiment, but as something we can measure and observe and make assumptions based off of, and predict the future based off of, and extrapolate the past based off of, we're empowered, it seems, to be able to, in the same way that if I have a cut and I'm out hiking or something, as an adult, I can just forget about it. I can just go, that's not going to stop me right now. So what the hell's the point in worrying about it? Whereas my daughter, who's 2, is totally distracted, needs the baby shark band-aid right now. And that's not the one she wants. And so in the same way that, like, it doesn't mean that my anger or my sadness or my fear or my hunger is not valid, but it does mean that it's simply a part, it's a constituent part of the whole. So maybe speak a little bit, because that's just me putting words in your mouth a little bit there. Speak maybe a little bit to this idea of the emotional scientist and why we should take things personal.
Yeah, so this comes from the work of Mark Brackett, and he's written the book Permission to Feel. He is the director of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale. And so if you think about it, the contrast would be like the emotional judge, or the emotion judge, where we're judging our emotions. And oftentimes this even looks like we feel feelings about our feelings, right? As I feel angry that I'm sad.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel upset with myself that I'm feeling guilty. I feel disappointed that I felt embarrassed or awkward. And so the emotional scientist is practicing more of that curiosity than judgment. And it's one of these things you realize, especially in the moment, man, is it hard to do. And I think one way you can practice it is to really try to untangle the emotions from the interpretations. And most times when we're upset with someone, we would say, oh, I feel that they don't understand, or I feel that they are an idiot, or I feel like they always do this. I feel like they just won't get it. And those, while you're using the word feeling, you're not actually describing any feelings. You're just expressing beliefs. And so you can work that back and you go, all right, when I say I feel that they won't understand or they won't get it, we can ask the question, well, when you believe that, what is it that you feel? And so maybe it's, I feel intimidated, or I feel scared. I feel overwhelmed at the idea of sharing something with them that they're going to reject. I feel anxious about being rejected. I feel anxious about putting myself out there. I feel uncomfortable at the idea that like they might look at what I say as stupid. And I think this is oftentimes this opportunity for us to notice then even what is my, if I'm feeling frustrated or I'm upset, I'm angry, annoyed, I'm indignant, I'm feeling indignant, what am I then believing or what am I attributing about someone else? And then can I work that back to actually ask myself, what does that actually say about me? And what is going on inside of me, or what meaning am I putting onto this? We all have this experience probably. We come home and we expect something to have been done by our partner or someone else, and it hasn't been done. And now we immediately go off into sort of blaming or acting that upset outward versus realizing like the trigger is actually pointing to something deeper. Is maybe we have all these other things going on and we were really looking to just have one sense of certainty, which was that the dishes in the sink were going to be put in the dishwasher, or the laundry was going to be done, or there was going to be food already cooked by the time I got home. And now it's not. And so now what does that bring up for me? And how do those feelings actually point me in a direction to better understand what else is going on for me?
So I'm going to act on behalf of the person driving in their car who maybe hasn't done a lot of this and maybe doesn't innately identify with it the way that you do, and I probably do as well. Feels like when Kelly Starrett does Mobility WOD, and it's like on day 1 through 12, I'm here for it. And then day like 300, I'm like, shit, man, I'm not going to get anything done because all I'm going to be doing is couch stretches and doing, what is the voodoo, the floss tape. And so to my question back to you would be, okay, so you've just given like a beautiful, but layered approach to this emotional method, this emotional system. Is there a way for me to chunk that down into, and I'm not asking for if you don't have them, but is there a way for me to chunk that down so that I can behave in a way that's virtuous and I'm proud of and I understand in real time without having to feel like I'm Woody Allen walking around New York? I don't know if I liked how that person treated me. Can you talk me through like that person in the car right now who maybe his head is spinning? Hey, look, man, I got a 40-hour job a week for my job. I got these 3 kids. I got a relationship with my wife, and I'm still trying to What would you say to that person?
Yeah. So I would say first, just can you plant this seed for how can you practice a little bit more curiosity about whatever you're feeling the next time you're feeling it? And you can do that simply by just going like, the next time you feel something, ask yourself, is it a pleasant or unpleasant feeling? And is this a feeling that is high energy or low energy? And just that like beginning of orientation, of mapping, just building that level of a GPS system. Oh, I'm feeling very unpleasant right now. I'm feeling really pleasant. And this can oftentimes be like really energizing. I can't sleep at all because I'm so amped by it or dysregulated. And then sometimes the pleasantness can also, as much as it can be like fun, like I'm in an amusement park, it can also be the kind of pleasantness where I'm like content, peaceful, grateful, appreciative, like just hanging out with my family or watching a show I really like. So I think that's where I would encourage or invite people to like practice that level of internal orientation, pleasant, unpleasant, high energy, low energy, And the other thing that's key about that is I'm not saying good or bad, right? Is that we're starting to retrain this belief system that there are good emotions or bad emotions. There are just feelings. And yes, some feel more pleasant and some feel less pleasant. And context is going to really dictate that, right? Because as we know, like when you're feeling more objectively unpleasant feelings in the gym because of the sort of burn, we actually, due to context, like our brain is, we actually, probably most of us experience that as more pleasant, right? Especially those of us that really like working out. We're like, oh, I love the burn, right? Like this feeling of discomfort, right? It cues me that I'm like being productive. But if we felt a lot of those same sensations at night, we'd be like, something is wrong.
That never occurred to me, but yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
So that level of context is, the brain is just so wired to make meaning based on our environment and what we expect. And that's the big thing too, is just paying attention to our triggers. This is triggering. Great. What does that tell you about yourself? What does that tell you about what else is going on in your life? And instead of relating to it as this is what's happening to me, how can I be curious about what's actually going on inside me? And that's where I would just take people back to like pleasant, unpleasant, high energy, low energy.
I love that. I also think that I could see a world in which if I just had that sort of tacit understanding, the ability to have the two steering wheels that you see in the little planes, the ability to have the ego driving the ship and then that observer next to him, just there to check things out. I could see a world in which I'm very different with my 2-year-old daughter than I am while I'm podcasting. If me and you were in a dispute over a parking space, which would almost certainly not happen, but I'm just coming up with an example, I'd be different there. And so I could see a world where there's going to be aspects of myself, whether I like them or don't like them, that are certainly different. And you might even say segmented or compartmentalized from one another. And so I know that you've written about this a little bit, but I'd love to hear how you reconcile these different parts of yourself and if that's good, because I have given a lot of thought to trying to show up everywhere authentically as the same person. But even as I just gave you that description, it's clear that's not the case and probably not the best idea. And talk to me about what, now that you have this rubric, if you start to see the different components of yourself, what do you do? Yeah,
this is something I've been infinitely fascinated with, because I am like very aware, and I often feel, I think, some shame around not being able to be my best self in a lot of different situations, right? And also knowing there are times where it's, wow, like that version of Jared's amazing in this setting or with this group of people. And why is it so hard to bring him or have him appear with maybe this group of people or in this setting? And so I think for me, one thing that I've really come to accept and appreciate is just the nature of our personality differences, right? Just quite literally introversion, extroversion, even the types of people that we like to hang out with versus the ones we don't, the types of environments that we might feel more comfortable in versus the ones we feel less comfortable in, or the environments that we're more familiar in versus unfamiliar. And I think the first thing I would just, again, offer and invite anyone to is just getting more clear about those differences for yourself. Even just the question of like, where am I likely to feel more pressure? And how does pressure oftentimes influence me to behave in very predictable ways? And then you can ask yourself, like, how is that version of myself serving what I want to get out of this, or what the intended outcome would be, or how I would prefer this to go? Because sometimes maybe it's the pressure or the other influences of the environment move you to behave in a certain way that just works and you're fine with. And maybe there's nothing there that needs to change. Though I think it's, beneficial for us to be, again, curious as opposed to judgmental about like, how do those different dynamics shape us? I know for me, if I'm going into a situation that I expect maybe to be one way and then it isn't that, like maybe I'm going to a CrossFit class and I expect there to be a certain coach, or I expect certain people to be there. And then that isn't the case. And maybe the class is like actually way more crowded. I've learned like, I'm going to probably be way more quiet as I start navigating that situation or getting reacclimating it to it than what I expected it to be. Mm. And I think a previous version of myself would have been much more judgmental of that, even in it or after the fact. And now just realizing, oh, that's a pattern. And then I can start actually considering that before I go into it. Oh, I'm expecting it to be this way. And maybe I should start like even previewing a little bit. What if it is more crowded? And what if that coach that I was hoping that I was going to hang out with isn't actually there? It's a different coach. And so I think those are the kind of, in a way, emotional intelligence that starts like unfolding, but it all comes back to this basic practice of what are the patterns.
Yeah, I think measuring is the first step in any progress. And I think that's, again, a connective tissue to the fitness stuff. Super interesting. Jared, there's 2 questions that I ask everybody that comes on the show, and I would like to ask you those 2 questions now. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, buddy. The first question is, if you had access to unlimited financial resources, how would you profitably grow your current business?
Wow. Unlimited financial resources.
But they have to be it has to be profitable.
Yeah. I would do a lot more like podcasting. I would make a lot more content, and then I would hire a lot of people to help me distribute it. And I would also, I think for me, it's just, I would use the unlimited resources to help me do more of the things that I don't have enough time or I don't even have the desire or passion to do. And I think that is often what can get in the way of people's reach, their scale. In my opinion, is the sort of who, not how, right? So instead of me having to be stuck with how do I do this, who can I bring on board, and how can I just literally quite fund or employ others to help further the vision.
Yeah, great. For the record, also awesome answer, but reread that book, Who Not How. Excellent book.
Yeah.
The best part of it is that guy that wrote it didn't write it. He had somebody else write it. That's just, that pitch alone had to sell the book. Question number 2, if you had to give up this business and everything you've ever done before, and you had to start something totally new you've never tried before, what do you think that might be?
Start something totally new that I've never tried before.
Never done professionally. It'd be a
never done professionally. Okay. I think for me, I'm passionate about teaching. So for me, it would probably be teaching something else, coaching something else. I've long had a fascination with Japan and Japanese culture. I studied Japanese language for a little bit. So I would love to, there was a time where I thought maybe I was going to live in Japan and teach English. And so I think it'd just be another expression of teaching. I don't practice it quite often, but I do love martial arts. And I think there's like a fantasy to do more with that, whether that's teaching, my own practice. And then I also love music. And so my other fantasy is I'd be a singer in a rock and roll band.
Yeah, I find that the more simple the answers are, the more likely you're doing the right thing for you when people answer that question. Jared, this has been unbelievable. Undoubtedly, if somebody is still listening to this podcast right now, it is because they love your message and the way that you look at these types of things. Where can folks find you and what's in store for them when they do?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. A couple places. One is you can go to my website, equipped2evolve.com. That's the word equipped spelled out, and then the number 2, evolve.com. There's a ebook on there you can access called Breakthrough Mindset Shifts. You can also find me with Empower Coaching. Empower is spelled MPWR coaching. And we got some amazing things we're doing there. And we do these weekly leadership cohorts with groups of people that are from different organizations, teams, or just people that are interested in how to take more responsibility and improve their influence and impact in the world, as well as obviously working with teams within the same organization.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Spear and Clover Podcast with our very special guest, Jared Cohen. Jared, thank you so much for taking the time. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks, Jason. I appreciate it.
All right, brother.